Hi everyone, thanks for listening to another episode of Dogman Encounters Radio. I'm Vic Cundiff and I'll be your host for the show. If you've had an encounter of your own and would like to speak with me whether in private or on the show, please go to dogmanencounters.com and submit a report. I'd love to hear from you. Tonight's guests are Rachael and Robert. Rachael and Robert, welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you.
Thanks for being here. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you for having us, Vic.
Rachael, please give us a brief bio on yourself.
Well, I live in Clarence, Pennsylvania, and I'm 36 years old. I have 3 children, and I have had encounters with things since I was about 8 years old.
Wow, you got an early start then.
Yes, I did.
Yeah, sure sounds like it. Rachael, please tell us about the area where you live.
Well, Clarence is very rural. We live out in the woods. We have about 4.5 acres of property there. And I would say more than half of it is all wooded. We don't really have a whole lot of close proximity neighbors to us. Very quiet. And we just love living out in the country.
Minus the Dogman situation you have going on there, it sounds like an idyllic place to live.
Yes, it is. It's very peaceful.
Yeah, sure sounds like it would be. Do you have much in the way of running water in your area?
Yes, we do. I would say maybe less than a quarter of a mile down the road from my house, we have a small creek that runs through the property there. And we also have the same creek runs around the backside of our property.
In the pre-interview, I think you mentioned that on the other side of that creek, things are a little strange compared to other areas of your property. Please tell us about that.
Well, on the other side of the creek there, we have a swampy area where we have a lot of biodiversity there. We have a lot of different wildlife there. And we also hear a lot of strange noises. We don't really know what they are. And it's just, you have an odd feeling.
What is it that makes it so strange?
Well, when you walk out my front door and you go out onto my front deck, it's very quiet. Usually this time of year, you can basically have your own thoughts drowned out from the crickets and the tree frogs and just the regular nighttime noises. Lately, I would say in about the past 2 years now, when you go outside, very quiet. You may hear 1 or 2 crickets, and that's it. You have a very, very unnerving feeling. Just something's not right. You just have the feeling that you're being watched. I feel that way when I step outside the door, whether it's daytime or nighttime. I just always have the feeling that I have eyes on me.
If you go someplace and experience that, that's one thing. But right outside your front door to have that going on, that has got to be so eerie.
Yes, it is. And when we first moved into our property 8 years ago, I didn't feel that way. I felt safe. I felt secure. I didn't have any concerns. We knew the normal wildlife, like we have deer, we had coyotes, but nothing too concerning that you had to worry about. But just in the last 2 years, that's really changed. You just have an unnerving feeling.
Yeah, I can understand that. Do you have much in the way of black bears running around that area, or do you have them at all?
Oh, yes, we have quite a few black bears. I actually have pictures of about a 1-year-old cub in the front yard where he sat down and he tore down my hummingbird feeder right outside the door.
Since this activity started, have they gone away, or do they still seem to be around?
We have not seen a black bear around the property in, I would say, probably about 1.5 years, 2 years now.
1.5 years or 2 years, that's a long time. There must be something to it then.
Oh, there has to be, because we used to take walks on the property, and you used to see deer tracks, and occasionally you'd see a bear track, but now I haven't seen a bear track on our property for at least 1.5 years, 2 years.
Yeah, that's too long to be any kind of coincidence. They definitely must be gone. Now that you feel like you're under siege after having these Dogman experiences, has that taken all the enjoyment of being way out in the sticks away from you, or do you still find reasons why it's good to be living out there?
Oh, I still find reasons why it's good to be living out there. I mean, we still enjoy the property. and the solitude, because we definitely don't like living in the city. We're just not those type of people. We love living out in the country, but ever since my son had his encounters, we're a lot more cautious, and I guess you would say we pay more attention to our surroundings now than we did before.
Oh, I can understand that. Through the pre-interview, you made it perfectly clear how remote you are, but just wondering, how close is or how far is your nearest neighbor?
Well, my nearest neighbor is my father, and he's about 150 to 200 yards away from us.
Oh, well, that's closer than I expected. Has he had any problems with dogmen around his property too, or has it just been you?
He has not said anything. Now, my father, he really doesn't believe in these sorts of things. So honestly, I think if he did see anything, I don't think he would say.
Well, he might not believe they exist, but I just hope that he doesn't get an education. If he does, it's going to be a pretty rude awakening.
So do I. Now, Robert has told him about his encounters, and he said his grandfather basically just looked at him in a strange way, and he didn't really say anything.
Yeah, that's a shame. I really wish you would have supported him. Speaking of that first encounter your son had, before we bring Robert on to tell us all about his experience, I'd like for you to tell us what happened that night from your point of view so we can understand how this experience was for you. Please take us through those events.
Okay, well, the first of the sightings he had was last year in September, and when he finally told my husband and I about it, which was quite a few months afterwards, I was very intrigued by what he had to say, because Robert is not the type of boy where he fabricates these kinds of stories. He's very honest and open with anything that he sees or he feels or he encounters. So immediately when he did tell us about it, I didn't have a question that he was lying at all. So when he finally did tell us about it, he was very unnerved, he was concerned, and he was confused. My husband and I sat with him. We listened to what he had to say, and he told us that he was more curious about what he saw than afraid. I said, well, that's kind of understandable. I think I would be curious as well, because I've never seen anything like that myself. So we just supported him and told him that if it should ever happen again, please come and tell your dad and I, because we do need to know about this. And we just kind of left it at that. My husband and I talked about this at length, just he and I privately, and we discussed, okay, what should we do, if anything, because we really didn't know if there's anything we can do as far as protecting the home, protecting the kids. My husband and I sat and talked about this for hours, about how can we further protect the house. Well, maybe from now on when we go out, we are both going to be armed. So now when we go outside, we both have guns on us. We do not let anybody outside the house after dark, just for safety reasons, because we have no idea what's out there.
Yeah, that's probably a good move. Robert, one night in September of 2015, you had an unnerving experience. What happened to you?
Well, it was the morning of September 27th. I was laying in my bed. I had just woken up. My brother was still fast asleep at that time. I got up to open the window like I do every morning to let some light in. When I opened the window, it hadn't gotten foggy over the night, so there was dew and stuff on the window. On the window, when I looked at it, there was 2 paw prints. And you can see where that thing pressed its nose up against my window, and you can see like snot running down the window. As I'm still looking at that, I see a blur that goes probably only maybe 8-10 feet away from my window, and it runs past. It was just a gray and white shriek. As it's running, there's a tractor in its path. It jumps over the tractor, and it like almost literally flies into the woods. That's all I saw of it.
You said that you saw paw prints on your window. Did you measure those prints?
No, by the time I told Mom and Dad, they were long gone. I was too scared to tell them. I told my brother they were there. I woke him up, showed him. He thought that maybe I just used my fingers and made them.
If you had to guess on how large those prints were, what would you say? Were they about the size of your hand or larger, smaller? How big were they?
I'd say probably about maybe 1 or 2 inches wider than my hand. They were massive prints.
Yeah, sure sounds like it. You also mentioned the snot that was on the window. If you measured from the ground up to where the snot was, roughly how high do you think it would have been?
8.5 feet. Exactly.
Oh, that's pretty high. So the paw prints, were they at the same height on the window as the snot mark, or were they below that?
They were pretty much the same exact places. Like it ducked its head first.
Do you know if any other people in your area have seen dogmen as well?
No.
Yeah, I know the feeling almost has to be like lucky you, huh?
Yeah.
You waited quite some time to tell your mom that you had seen that dogman. Why did you wait so long?
Well, Mom and Dad, they usually believe this about spirits and stuff, but if I told them I saw a dogman, we've watched all kinds of, movies and stuff and shows that have dogmen in them. I thought that maybe they'd think I just got off the show and I want some attention. I basically thought that they'd think I'm nuts.
Rachel, when Robert let you know about what he had seen that night, what were your first thoughts?
Basically, shocked. I have never seen anything like that. I've never heard any strange howls up to this point. I didn't doubt that they existed because I've seen things that I can't explain. So I didn't doubt for a minute that he had seen something.
When Robert first shared the details of that first encounter with you, did you have any doubts about whether he had actually seen what he said he saw?
No, I did not have any doubts that he saw exactly what he said he saw, because he had fear in his eyes and just the tone of his voice. It kind of rattled him.
Since you believed his story, you were very supportive of him on that, or did you just give him a little bit of room to try and figure things out on his own instead?
Well, my husband and I, we both sat. We listened to what he had to say. We didn't interrupt him. We let him say his whole story. And my first question to him was, were you afraid? And he said, no. He said, I was more curious than afraid. He said, I didn't know what that thing was. He said, I was just amazed by how it moved and how it jumped over the tractor. And he said, I was just in awe of how it could move. And I said, well, do you think this is something we need to be concerned about? And he said, yeah. He said, because it was huge. So I said, well, I do believe what you're telling us. And my husband told him as well that he also believed him. And we told him that if he had any other sightings or if he heard anything, that he needed to let us know so that Dad and I can, handle it.
I'll tell you what, I am so glad you supported him that way. There couldn't be anything worse than someone like him having that kind of an experience and being turned away when he approached people he's supposed to be able to count on for help.
Oh, I know that feeling firsthand. Like I said, I have seen spirits and things since I was 8 years old, so I know how that feels. I was raised with my grandparents, and when I was 8 years old, I started to see things, and I would go to my grandparents, and I would try to explain to them what I had seen. And it's not so much I don't think that they didn't believe me. I think they were scared. And it was just something that was not discussed in the house. So I just learned to keep my mouth shut and not say a word. And I don't want my kids to go through that. I mean, I want them to have a support system where they know there is people they can come to and that believe them and that trust them.
I can understand your parents being scared by you sharing that story with them about what you saw. And I do believe, I can't explain it, but I do believe that for some reason, some people just have that ability to see things that other people can't. But I guess to put a positive spin on your experience when you were a kid and unfortunately saw those spirits, at least that experience that you had, kind of somewhat getting the cold shoulder from your parents, I'm sure that shaped how you responded in turn when Robert came forward and told you about his experience, which that is a good thing.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I don't discount anything until I talk to someone thoroughly And then I make my own deductions whether I think it's truth or not. But I don't right away say, no, you didn't see that.
I really like the way you think. I respect it too. Yeah, when someone in that kind of a situation reaches a hand out for help, you don't smack it away. It's unfortunate that that's pretty common. It does happen a lot, but it just shouldn't be that way.
No, it shouldn't happen that way, because I honestly feel that if the general public were more open to these types of creatures and spirits and things like that, I think you would find a lot more people would come forward.
Oh, sure you would. But, like we talked about in the pre-interview, when you consider how people who see these things are treated, it's no mystery that so many of them refuse to come forward and talk about what they've seen.
Yes, that's true.
Robert, when you had your second encounter, you handled it a lot differently than your first. Please tell us about that second encounter.
This was at night, February 22nd, 2016, probably around 1 or 2 in the morning. I was also laying in my bed, and my brother, again, was fast asleep. I had been hearing growling probably for the past 5 minutes, just laying in my bed listening to this low growl. I didn't want to open the window. I just kept laying there thinking, I'm not going to open the window. And suddenly I got this, sense just came over me and said, open the window. I went over and I opened the window. It just kept nagging me. I had to do it. I opened the window, and probably, I'm going to say, maybe 20 feet away from my window, there's another dog man standing there. This one is different, though. It is black. I could tell that because it was the full moon and the moonlight was shining on it. This one looked like it had hands, though, and it was just standing probably about 2 feet away from the edge of the woods, and it just kept on staring into the woods. It wasn't moving, it wasn't doing anything, just staring into the woods as if it's waiting for something. As I'm watching that, this time I got a sense of real fear. I slammed that window closed, and I went back into my covers, and I didn't come out. I didn't get no sleep that night at all. Where it went after that, I don't know. I wasn't opening the window again.
Oh, I don't blame you. I don't blame you at all. Since you got a better look at this dog man, how did it compare size-wise to the first one you saw?
They were probably about the same size. They didn't look no bigger or shorter.
If that's the case, how tall do you think it was?
Probably about 8.5, 9 feet tall, just about the same as the other one.
That's pretty sizable. When you looked out that window, did it ever look directly at you and make any facial expressions, or did it, for the most part, ignore you?
When I looked out the window, it turned its head sideways, like it knew I was watching it, but it didn't want to show its whole face at me.
Wow, that's pretty strange. When it moved and went away, did it move unnaturally, or did it look somewhat natural in its movements?
Oh, it moved pretty strange. It moved like a human.
Yeah, if that doesn't make the hair in the back of your neck stand up, I don't know what will. When you were laying there in bed and heard that low growl, did you initially think it was a bear? What did you think?
As I heard the growl, I knew right away what it was. I've watched TV shows and heard bear growls on the TV and stuff. This didn't sound like no bear growl. I knew right away it had to be another one.
When you say it didn't sound anything like a bear's growl, why do you say that? What quality did it have that separates it?
It was deeper than a bear growl.
Ooh, that's pretty deep. Did this second dog man do anything that made you think it might have had some paranormal abilities?
No, not this one. As I was closing the window, it was walking away. It wasn't running or jumping or doing anything. It probably did, but I can't say for sure.
You said this second dog man didn't do anything that made you think it might have had paranormal abilities, but when you described the way the first dog man you saw jumped over the tractor, could that have been just because of its athleticism, that it looked that way when it jumped over the tractor, or do you think there was some kind of a paranormal element that allowed it to look the way it did when it jumped over it?
I talked to Mom and Dad about that, and they said even like an animal like that, to do that sort of moves, a flesh and blood animal can't do that. That had to be paranormal.
Understand, dogmen, for whatever reason, are freakishly talented jumpers. That doesn't mean that they can glide through the air or anything like that, but if you're not used to seeing something as large as they are jump the way they can, I can understand how it would kind of put you off. You're saying that no matter how athletic it was, what you saw it do, jumping over that tractor, there had to be something else making it look the way it did.
Yes.
From what I understand, you were much more strongly affected by that second encounter you had than the first one. Why is that?
Well, this second one, as I was looking at it, I could feel the fear just going through me. I can sense this second one, it was no good at all. It was evil, just pure evil. This first one, I didn't feel no evil at all. I'm not going to say that it was like a friendly one, but it didn't seem like it had any harm to it.
That had to be so strange to experience that. You mentioned the idea that popped into your head that the second Dogman you think gave you. Were these words that you actually heard in your head, or was it more of a feeling that came over you?
It was more of a feeling.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah, that's also something that's reported pretty frequently. Rachael, have you noticed any behavioral or personality changes that stemmed from that second encounter Robert had?
I would have to say that he has become more cautious, and he seems to be more open to talk to his father and I. He does display more fear. Before these two encounters, he would leave his window open in his bedroom. Now, as soon as it gets dark, that window is shut. He will not sleep, even during this time of the year, hot in his bedroom. He will not leave the window open at night. It is closed.
Considering that he's seen two dogmen outside his window on two different occasions, I can't say I'll blame him for doing that. Poor guy, that's awful.
No, I don't blame him either. My husband and I have since closed our windows at night as well.
Oh, I can understand that too. I don't blame you one bit. I know after these experiences happen, I'm sure you've been watching him a lot more closely than you did before they happened. Are there any red line issues that you're monitoring right now from him that have you really concerned, or is he handling this really well considering what he's been through?
I think he's handling it really well. He hasn't really let it, I guess you want to say, rule his life. He knows what he saw. There is no question in his mind what he saw. So he doesn't question his feelings and thoughts about what he saw. So he seems pretty steadfast in where he's at, how he feels about what he saw. He still has some questions about why was it there? Why am I the only one who saw it both times? But as far as it really upsetting his day-to-day life, no, it hasn't done that.
Well, that's really good news. He's definitely one of the most precocious guys you'll find for being as young as he is. That's a huge benefit to him. That's got to play a big role in why he's able to handle these situations so well.
Well, I think one of the reasons that he's handling these two encounters pretty well is because my three children also see spirits. They have had encounters numerous times since they were probably 3 and 4 years old. So he's had quite a bit of experience previously with other entities and things. So I think that's helped to help him process what he saw as far as the Dogman sightings go. And I think his previous experience with seeing spirits and other entities has helped him to be more confident and aware of what he sees.
Well, you can take good things and bad things from whatever experiences you have, and I guess the good things you can take from him seeing spirits in the past would be the fact that, I guess in a way, they kind of prepped him for the stress of seeing dogmen, so I guess you could play the glad game that way.
Yeah, that's what I think it is. Like I said, he was concerned about it, but he didn't freak out. I mean, he understood that, okay, I saw this. I know what I saw. So now let's deal with it. What can we do? How should we handle this? My husband and I did the best we could to support him, and we took the necessary precautions as far as arming ourselves when we go outside. And we do not leave the children alone when we are outside. We are all together. And I think that's kind of helped to make him feel more secure in his sightings, that he knows that his mom and dad support him.
Oh, I'm sure that does make a big difference. If someone has to have an experience like the two he had, I can't think of a better situation than To have parents like he has who support him and understand him, that's just so good to hear. Rachel, how safe do you feel in your own home now that you know what might be just feet away from you on the other side of your home's walls?
Well, I will say that on the whole, I still feel safe in my home. But having said that, I am no longer naive in the way that I know there are things out there that can come in my home if they want to. That's unnerving to know that as powerful as these creatures are, if they want in my house, they're going to get in my house. Regardless if we have deadbolts on the doors, we have all the windows down and locked or not, if they want in, they can come in. So, in that respect, yes, I do feel unsafe in my home because I know that no matter what kind of safety precautions we take in the house, they can still get in if they want to.
Oh, sure they can. Yeah, at any time, but thank goodness they don't seem to do that very often.
Oh, I hope not, because now, that's been a concern and a worry that my husband and I have had. We've asked each other numerous times, if it does return, what next? It's come up to a window already. What's to say what it might do the next time it returns?
Yeah, you don't really know what they might do if they do come back, but hopefully that won't come to be. Speaking of that topic, though, in the pre-interview, we talked about things you can do to hopefully protect yourself if they do come back and start to threaten you. Did you go out and buy those little handheld ear horns that I was telling you about, or is that something on the to-do list?
That is still something on the to-do list.
Okay. Well, I hope you do go out and get some sooner rather than later, just in case they do come back.
Oh, we most definitely will.
Well, that's good. When you and your husband sit down and talk about what your son saw, what are his thoughts on his experiences?
Well, my husband is, just like me. He supports Robert. He believes him. But it has made him more protective of the family as a whole, more than he was before. He tends to watch the property more. He pays attention more when we're outside together. He's more protective of the children. When we used to go outside before these encounters, we would let the kids be kids. They'd run around the yard, they'd go ride their bike, they'd play in the yard. My husband and I would do yard work, the kids would be running around. Now, though, since this happened, my husband doesn't let the kids out of his sight. Wherever he is, they are. So it has made my husband more protective.
Whether Robert realizes it or not, it sounds to me like he hit the lottery when parents were being passed out.
Well, thank you.
You're welcome. It sounds that way to me. I'm really impressed by both of you. It's so good to hear that you support him the way you do.
Oh, absolutely. There's no other stance we can take on it because, like I said, nobody knows their kids better than the parents. And when Robert told us about these encounters, both of us could just tell that he was not lying. He was not fabricating a story to get attention or to play, woe is me, I saw this, have pity on me. No, we could tell that he had seen something. He had seen this creature, and we had no doubts right off the jump that he was being honest.
Well, you know what they say, you can't lie to your mom.
This is true. This is very true, because we knew right away that he was not lying and he wasn't making up a story.
I'm sure you would know if he was lying.
Oh, most definitely.
To date, have you sought help with this matter from anyone other than me?
Yes, we have. The first person I contacted about this was Lon Strickler from Phantoms and Monsters website. They are local to our state. They are also in Pennsylvania. I wrote Lon an email, and I told him about Robert's encounters. He contacted me, I would say maybe 2 or 3 days later by email, and he wanted to know if I would be open to having some investigators come to the property. And my husband and I discussed it, and we said, sure, like if anybody has any more expertise on this, please do, because we were kind of clueless as to what these creatures are and what they could do if they return. So we set up a date and a time, and he sent out Butch Witkowski, and one of Butch's investigators, his first name was Troy. They come out to our property on the 18th of August, and to say the least, that encounter with Butch, not so much Troy, but with Butch, let's just say it left more to be desired. Things did not go as I thought they would.
Why do you say that? What was different than what you expected when they came to your property?
Well, we had several phone conversations with Butch before they arrived at the property. And from the phone conversations we had with him, he seemed to be a fairly decent gentleman. He was nice. He was polite on the phone. He told us about some other sightings in the area. And he said, can't wait to come out and see you. Okay. So they come to the property on the 18th of this month, and they introduce themselves. And I asked Robert to come outside with them, because he's the one that had the sighting. And one thing about Robert is when he first meets people that he does not know, he's cautious because he doesn't know you. He's not the type of person where he's going to come right out and just start blurting out things that he encountered or he has seen. So at first, he was kind of apprehensive with Butch and Troy. He didn't really want to say anything. He did, but he didn't. So I kind of had to kind of coax him to say, okay, Robert, you need to tell them what you saw. That's why they're here. That is all I said to him. So right away, Butch is standing on our front porch with my husband and I, and Troy takes Robert, and they go walk over by Robert's bedroom window. And Troy's asking him questions about, okay, how far would you say it is? How tall do you think it was? Things like that. And Robert's answering his questions. And my husband got out a tape measure and walked over to Robert's window to do a measurement. And that's how we found out it was about 8.5 feet tall. So after that, Robert finished telling Troy about his first encounter. And then Robert just kind of clammed up. He was like, okay, I've said what I have to say and that's it. Troy looked up at me and so did Butch. So, and kind of telling him, okay, Robert, don't forget about your second sighting. You need to tell him about that. That's all I said is I looked at Robert and I said, well, Robert, you need to tell them about your second sighting. Don't forget about that. Then he says, oh, yeah. So he started telling them about the second sighting. At that point in time, my husband and I and Butch were still on the front deck. Butch is asking me questions about the property, how many acres we have, how long we've lived here, what age our home is, how many people live in the house, do we work, do we not, things like that. And he never once really talked to Robert at all. He left it up to Troy, his investigator, to go with Robert down in the yard and to look at the property in the area. Troy and Robert, after Robert finished telling Troy about the second encounter he had, Troy and Robert walked back over to the deck, and he asked my husband, can we go up here in the woods, up in your property? Because he said, Robert told us that you have the mine shafts on the property that are abandoned. And my husband said, sure, we can go up there. So my husband and Troy and Robert and Butch started to make their way up in the woods while I stayed on the deck. They were up there, I would say, probably 10 minutes or so, thereabouts, about 10, 15 minutes. And Butch comes walking back out of the woods by himself. He comes down in the yard, and we have like a patio set down in the yard, and he pulled up a chair and he sat down. And he proceeded to ask me a bunch more questions about, have I ever seen anything? Who lives around us? just general questions. So I answered his questions, and he wanted to know if I had ever seen Dogman or Bigfoot, and I said, no, I have not. But I said, I have heard strange things, and he asked me if I've ever had any experience with the paranormal before, and I told him I had. I told him I had seen things since I was about 8 years old, and he seemed kind of intrigued by that, and he asked me to elaborate on that, and I did. In the meantime, my husband, Troy, and Robert are still up in the woods. I would say they were up there a good half an hour longer, and they were just walking the property. Finally, they come back down out of the woods, and Butch come up on the front porch, and he was writing some things down on a clipboard. That's when he proceeded to say, well, I've been a police officer for a number of years. I've been investigating UFOs and doing this for 27 years now. It was kind of like he was starting to get a little arrogant and cocky, and I kind of got the feeling that he really didn't believe Robert, because it kind of intrigued me that why would he walk out of the woods after only being there a few minutes and come down and take a seat when he's supposed to be such the professional? We're here to investigate this sighting, but he leaves his investigator to do the work? That kind of sent up a red flag for me right away. Was, okay, that doesn't really sound right. And he just proceeded to tell me about his law enforcement background and whatnot. And he just took almost on a different tone to himself, where he just got arrogant. He got very gruff and short. When we would try to explain anything else to him, it was like he didn't want to hear it. And they were there on our property for about 4 or 5 hours. And once they left, my husband and I, we were kind of, didn't really know how we felt about what had just happened. I told my husband, I said, I don't really think that went well. I said, what do you think? And he said, no, not really. He said, Butch didn't really seem to believe us, honestly. I said, no, I got the same feeling myself. But before they left, Butch said that he was going to write up his report, and if he found anything, that he would let us know. And they left. Well, I believe it was 2 days ago, Lon Strickler put out his Phantoms and Monsters newsletter. In that newsletter is the report from Butch Witkowski on our encounter, that he had come out to the property and his findings. It's the one that's listed as Clarence, Pennsylvania. That's us. And basically in that report, now mind you, he did not call. We have not heard from him since they left the property. He did not call to discuss this with me or my husband. He just published this report. And in it, he says that the abandoned mine shafts are non-existent on the property, that we made those up, that he believes my son saw something the first time, but he believes that encounter number 2 was a fabrication that I made up. And basically the gist of the newsletter was that I want attention, and I am the one that made Robert lie about the second encounter. He has the acreage wrong of our property. He has the year of our home wrong. And he also has in there that I told him that I see large flying reptile-like birds. I never made that statement at all. I don't even know where that came from. He also says that he does not believe that there was anything that happened at all the second time. And he says he walked the property. He didn't find any evidence that anything had ever been there. You know, basically calling me a liar, and that I wanted attention, and all I did was answer the man's questions. So that kind of left a sour taste in my mouth after the encounter with him. And, just a word of caution to everyone out there as far as our experience. I can't speak for everyone, but I can speak from our experience. If you do see any of these creatures or Bigfoot or anything else, oh, that's something else. I also put in the email to Lon that my grandmother, who also lives with us, saw a creature that she describes as a Bigfoot. And I started to tell Butch about that. And he says, well, that's all well and good, but we're actually here for the Dogmen, so we're not really worried about that. Okay. Just a very rude and crude man. I myself, if you have a sighting of any creatures, Dogman, Bigfoot, UFO, anything like that, from my personal experience with this man, I would not contact him at all. Very unprofessional. He claims to be such the investigator and expert, but all I saw basically the whole time he was there is he sat on his butt, so to speak, and didn't really do much of anything and let Troy do all the legwork.
Well, it goes without saying, I am so sorry you and your family, especially Robert, had to endure that kind of horrible treatment. You never should have been treated that way. There's no excuse for that.
Immediately after they left, we all went in the house and we sat down at the table. And, like I said, my husband and I conversed with one another. Well, how do you think it went? And Robert stepped up and he said, well, that was a waste of time. He said, I wish we wouldn't have said anything. He said, I don't think he believed me. And I looked at him, I said, Robert, I honestly don't think he did either. He said, Troy was okay with him, but he said, that Butch, he said, I don't know. He said, I don't think he believed me at all. I said, no, I don't think he did either. I said, we'll have to wait and see. But what really angers me the most about it is I would have appreciated it had he have phoned me to go over his report. So if he did have these beliefs and concerns, I could have addressed them with him. I would like to know why he felt I made Robert fabricate the second sighting. Like, what did I say or do to give him that impression? Because I certainly didn't want to give anybody that impression. I had to kind of coax Robert into telling him about his second sighting because he didn't want to. And that was the whole reason why they were at the property. I didn't see this creature. So, I can't speak for Robert and say, oh, well, this is what I saw because I didn't see it. So maybe he mistook that as I was coaxing Robert to make up a story. That is not my intention at all. But we'll never know that because he didn't call me to go over this. And if he was such a professional investigator, I would think that he should have called me. And he never did.
In the pre-interview, you told me that because of the way you were treated, you almost decided not to come on the show tonight with me. I'm so glad you decided to go through with this.
Yes, that is true. I asked Robert how he felt about doing this interview. And at first he kind of looked at me and he's like, I don't know, Mom. He said, when we had those other people here, that didn't go well. I said, no, it didn't. But I said, I will tell you one thing. I have talked to Vic on one occasion already by phone. And I said, we talked for about 2 hours. I said, Vic is a very nice man. He is not rude and crude like Butch. He does believe that you saw what you say you saw. And I said, he wants to hear your story. So I said, I'm going to leave it totally up to you. If you want to do the interview, we will do it. If not, I will call Vic and I'll tell him, Vic, I'm sorry, but we're not going to do this. And he thought about it for a few minutes and he said, okay. He said, yeah, we might as well. Because he said, I want people to know what I saw because he said people need to be on the lookout for these things. So that's how we're here this evening.
Well, like I told you before, I am so glad you decided to stay the course and come on the show tonight because I do feel it's important to get that story out there.
Oh, absolutely. So are we.
Do you know about all the people who have seen these things, or did you just recently find out about the show and consequently all the other eyewitnesses?
No, I have watched just about every episode of Dogman Encounters Radio. And the reason for that is because of Robert's sighting. Right away, when he said he had these encounters, in passing, I have read some books in the past that had mentioned dogmen, werewolves, what have you. But, you kind of, okay, that's a good book. But after he had his sightings, you kind of intrigued. And I'm the type of person where if something intrigues me, I want to learn all I can about it. And especially when it involves my children. I want to know as much as I can about these things, what they're capable of, what their mindset is, things of that nature. So I just burned up the internet trying to find everything and anything I could about these creatures. And I honestly, up until Robert had his sightings, I didn't even know there was any radio shows or anything on YouTube about dogmen, period. Honestly, it shocked me when I saw your station come up, Dogman Encounters Radio, and I thought, wow, there must be a lot of people that see these things for somebody to make a radio show. So Robert and I, and actually the whole family, sat at the table for, 4, 5, 6 days, and we listened to just about every episode of your show, and it just fascinated me to hear that these creatures are seen all over North America and from what I understand also overseas. So it kind of gave Robert, I know, some comfort knowing that, hey, I'm not alone. Because that's something that he said to Dad and I. He's like, wow, I kind of wondered, am I the only one that ever saw these things? And he says, now I know I'm not. So to you, Vic, I'm very appreciative for you personally for doing this radio show and for taking the time to listen to people, to their encounters, and to give people like Robert and my family a place to come and share our experiences. Because without shows like yours, we wouldn't have any place to go. So I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for doing what you're doing. And God bless you, because without you, we'd kind of be left out there in the dark.
Of course, it goes without saying that's why I created the show in the first place. That is really good to hear.
Oh, yeah, without question, because, like I said before this, I didn't even know these kind of shows existed, where you could hear other people's encounters. Like I said, I knew of them, but I didn't know anyone personally who had ever seen any. I'd never talked to anyone who had ever seen anything. So to hear some radio shows of yours about it, it kind of really got me thinking that, wow, these things, there has to be something to this, because why would so many people make up stories and lies and come on a radio show? And a lot of your guests, I noticed that you can genuinely hear the fear in their voices. That, to me, just makes it all the more worthwhile to listen to your show, because it leaves the listener almost in a way comforted, because I know it did Robert, to hear how these other people's emotions were at the time of their sighting. It kind of gave him more credence to what he said, and it kind of validated what he saw, because he mentioned to me that I'm not alone, other people have seen this thing as well. And I think that gave him a big boost in his confidence and being able to talk about what he saw. So that's wonderful.
Well, I've said it before, misery loves company, that's a fact. I'm sure it was really helpful for Robert to be able to hear all these other eyewitnesses come on the show and talk about their experiences. So, like I said before, I'm so glad to hear that it did help him.
Oh, yes, very much so.
From what I understand, about 2 to 3 years ago, you were hanging clothes in your backyard when you had an interesting experience. What happened that day?
Well, as you said, I went outside to hang some clothes on the line, and it was, I would say, probably around noon. I heard some noises up in the woods, like twigs snapping, some leaves rustling, and, at first, I didn't give it much thought. I thought, well, it's probably squirrels because we have a lot of squirrels in the woods. So I thought, well, it's probably the squirrels running through the trees, running through the leaves and whatnot. So at first I just kind of blew it off and I kept hanging laundry. Well, I noticed that the noises kind of got a little louder and they sounded a little closer to where I was. And just the volume of the sounds I was hearing, you could just tell that it was not a squirrel. It wasn't a bird, that this was something larger. And then I kind of got a little unnerved because I was unarmed. I did not have a gun with me at the time. And I was outside by myself. And I kind of stopped hanging the laundry. And I kind of peeked up in the woods to see if I could see anything, and right away I'm thinking, well, it's probably a black bear. Because, as I said before, we have had bears on the property. So I tried to look up in the woods to see if I could see, what was making the noise. I didn't see anything, but I could still hear it. So I stood there for probably 2 or 3 minutes, just listening and scanning the wood line. I couldn't see a thing. So I went back to hanging up laundry. Well, I would say that the noises got to probably within 2 to 3 feet of the edge of the wood line to where my front yard starts. And that's not too far from where I was hanging laundry. So I thought, okay, this is getting a little too close. If it's a bear, I don't want to be out here. So I walked maybe, I'd say 5 or 6 feet to my left. And we have like a little opening where you can actually drive a truck up into the woods. I walked over there to kind of get myself away from the laundry line, number one. But I also wanted to look up in the woods to see if I could have a better view to see what this thing was. I walked over to the clearing there, and just as I made it to the edge of the clearing, a rock was thrown at me. And I don't mean, just a little pebble. It was a decent-sized rock. It was probably about 4 inches or so. And it landed within about 2 to 3 feet at my feet. And that's when I got out of there. I just had a feeling come over me of fear. And I just had the feeling that if I don't get out of here, something bad's going to happen. That I'm somewhere where I should not be. That I need to get. So I ran back in the house. I left the clothes laying in the basket. I come in the house. I told my husband when I come in the door, I said, there is something out there. And he looked at me and says, what do you mean there's something out there? I said, there is something up in the woods. I said, it just threw a rock at me. And he kind of looked at me and said, what? I said, it threw a rock at me. I said, there is something up there in the woods. I want you to come out. And I said, bring the guns. So he got his gun and he gave me mine. So we both went back outside. We walked up by the wood line. You could still hear twigs snapping, leaves rustling. And at this point in time, we could hear like thuds and thumps where I don't know if it was throwing rocks on the ground or throwing tree limbs or something on the ground. I don't know, but you could feel vibration in your feet in the ground when you would hear these thuds and thumps. And we both stood there for probably, I don't know how long, just trying to look up in the woods to see if we could see what it was. We never did see what was making those sounds. So to this day, we have no idea what it was. But it was very unnerving for me.
Oh, that had to be awfully unnerving. When you first mentioned that a rock was thrown at you, I'm sure a lot of listeners instantly thought you must have been dealing with a Sasquatch, but understand, dogmen do seem to throw rocks too from time to time. When you followed that up with talking about the thuds and thumps you heard as something ran off, that is a Sasquatch trait. I don't know of any occasions where dogmen have done that. They're not seemingly equipped to do that, actually, the way a Sasquatch would be with their big feet. So I'm thinking that when you had that experience that day, it actually was a Sasquatch that was messing with you and not a dogman, which who would have thought that you'd ever say that having a Sasquatch encounter was a good thing? But I think it was.
Well, I just can't explain, the feeling that came over me when that rock hit the ground. I just got a gut feeling that told me, okay, you need to get out of here. Because whatever this is, it is not a bear, and it does not want you there. And it was just a sense of fear that if I don't get out of here, something's going to happen. So through the years, I've learned to listen to that feeling. So I couldn't get in the house fast enough.
Oh, I can understand that. I'd say whatever it was, it got its message across loud and clear.
Oh, most definitely. After that, when I go out to hang laundry, my husband always goes with me. So after that, I have learned that when I have laundry to hang, I don't go outside by myself. And I always have a gun with me.
I don't blame you at all. When Robert told you about his second encounter, did you entertain the idea of moving, or were you pretty steadfast in your idea to stay?
No, we never really entertained the idea to move. We're just the kind of family that, we kind of roll with the punches. When things happen, they happen, and we deal with it. We're not going to let these things run us off our property. So far, and I hope and pray to God that it doesn't go any further than that, but, I mean, his two encounters, they didn't really seem like they meant any harm. To me, it sounds more like they're curious. Especially the first sighting that he had where it was looking in his window. To me, that sounds like curious behavior. Now, not to say that they're nothing to fear, because they are. But, I mean, just with his two encounters that he had, that's not going to ruin our lifestyle and cause us to move. We've lived here 8 years now, and we're going to continue to live there. That's not going to change.
Well, I'm glad you're able to deal with it so well. That's definitely a good thing, and I hope it never does escalate to the point where you're almost driven off that property.
I do too, because that's family property that we live on. My grandparents, my dad's parents, owned pretty much all of the town of Clarence at one point. So the land that we live on, that's my family's land. So I would hate to have to be forced off of it.
Yeah, it really would be a shame if that did come to be. Robert, I forgot to ask you earlier, did you see how the second Dogman's legs looked?
They were bent.
By you saying that they were bent, in which direction? Were they hominid-style legs or more canid in appearance?
More canine, like when a dog would stand up, their legs would be bent. That's the same as the Dogman's were.
I'm sure you didn't even know what to think. From what I understand, you were sharing your bedroom with your brother at the time of your two encounters. Because you tried to wake your brother, Preston, on both occasions so he could see the Dogmen, was there contention between you from what I understand?
Not so much. I mean, he was kind of mad because he thought I made it up, and I woke him up because he was fast asleep, and he said he was having the best dream. He always uses that excuse.
Oh, okay, I see. Is Preston older or younger than you are?
Younger. I'm like a year and a month older than him.
Ah, that explains it. You know how little brothers are.
Yeah.
Rachael, you also have a daughter, Kayla. What's her take on all this?
Well, at first, when Robert told us all about his sighting, she was scared. She hasn't seen anything like that, but she got concerned. She asked us questions. She's only 9 years old. So she wanted to know, okay, can these things hurt us? Can they come in the house? Are they going to come after Robert? We had to kind of sit down and explain things to her that, no, we hope they don't get in the house. We can't make any promises, but no, we hope that they don't. And we just tried to comfort her the best that we could. And we just tried to explain to her that these things do exist and that we'll just deal with things as they happen. And that she doesn't really have anything to be afraid of, that Mom and Dad are there. We're not going to let anything get them and take them or hurt them. If it's within our power to stop it, we will, of course, do that. So that kind of put her fears to rest. She was curious, too. She asked Robert a lot of questions about what it looked like, what it did, how big it was, and just general questions about it. And Robert described it to her and to us also as, he said it basically looked like the creature from the Van Helsing movie. So she kind of found that intriguing, and she wanted to see a picture of it so she could have a better idea of what her brother saw. So I got on the internet, and I pulled up some pictures from the movie Van Helsing, and I showed her those pictures, and she was kind of frightened then by it. And she asked Robert, she said, "Is that really what you saw?" And he said, "Yep, pretty much to a T." He said, "That's pretty much exactly what I saw." So she kind of got a little afraid again after that. So we just had to retell her that everything's all right. Dad and I are here. We're not going to let these things try to get anybody. And she seems to be okay with it now.
When she finally got an idea of what it was that Robert had seen, I can understand that shaking her up. That would shake almost anyone up. But it sure sounds to me like she did take that whole situation in stride, the same way Robert did. That's great.
Oh, yeah. Like I said, we're a very open family. We try not to keep any secrets from each other. And my husband and I support all three of our children. That's not to say that we are gullible, that we believe everything they tell us, because they're kids. Kids make up stories. They lie. But like I said earlier, you definitely know your own children. And you know when they're telling you the truth and when they're telling you a lie. And you also know when they're having genuine fear. So we always deal with those types of things as they happen. And when they tell us, well, we're afraid, or if they have questions about something, my husband and I do our best to explain it to them. And that's all we can do as parents.
Well, I said it before and I'll say it again. When parents were being assigned, I think Robert did hit the lottery because he's got some good ones.
Well, one thing that we do, and it's not just myself, it's my husband as well. Like I said before, when Robert first told us about these encounters, I didn't really know anything about these dogmen. Like I said, I had heard of them, but I really had no reason to ever really do any research on it other than, okay, that's kind of interesting. I don't know if these things really exist or not, but, it's interesting. Until he had his own encounters. And we both wanted to know as much as we could about these things. So we spent weeks on the internet researching everything we could about it so we could inform the kids and try not to lie to them and make up stories and tell the kids, oh, there's nothing to worry about. They're just here. They're just passing through, whatever. No, we don't lie to our children. We have told them that, can these things hurt us? Yes, they can. Can they get in the house if they really want to? Yes, they can. We are honest with them because we don't want to lie to the kids and tell them, oh, everything's fine. These things are never going to come back. They're not going to hurt you. They're not going to come in the house. Because we want them to be as prepared as they can be in case that should happen. Not only that, but that ruins trust between your children and you. And that's the last thing that my husband and I want from our children, is to not trust us. So, no, we don't lie to our kids. We don't baby them. We don't try to coddle them and say, oh, everything's okay, because we don't know if everything's okay. And our three kids, they understand that. They know that if something should happen, we will deal with that when it happens. But they know what they need to do if something happens. We already have a game plan set up where we plan to buy those air horns by the 3rd of next month. And we have already told the kids, here's what you're going to do. You're each going to get one, and you're going to keep it in your room. And if you hear anything outside, or God forbid, it should climb in your window, or it should break down the door, blow that air horn and keep blowing it. So that will not only alert Dad and I that something is wrong, but hopefully it'll scare this thing away. And it will give your dad and I time to grab the guns and grab our air horns and do what we need to do. So we've already got a game plan set up if things should turn bad. At the end of the day, we all live with one another in the same house. And God forbid, but if these things do come back and they do try to break in, or if they do break in, we all, including the kids, we all need to be ready and know what to do. You know, there's nothing worse, in my opinion, than having something like that happen and everybody freak out and panic, and you don't know up from down, you don't know what to do. That's when bad things happen. So we already have game plan already set to go. The kids know what to do, and they know how to handle it. So I just hope and pray to God that we never have to do that. But if we do, I don't want my family caught off guard where we're vulnerable and we don't know how to defend ourselves. Because one thing I understand with these creatures is you don't want to be caught off guard. And that's like the worst case type of scenario, is to be caught off guard and to be cornered and not have a way to defend yourself. So we make sure that if something does happen, we have ways to defend ourselves.
I mentioned Sasquatch just a bit ago. Would it almost be a relief for you if you were dealing with Sasquatch instead of dogmen?
Well, I would have to say yes, because my grandmother, who also lives with us, she has seen Sasquatch on one occasion about 3 or 4 years ago. Now, that is my grandmother on my mother's side. Having said that, my other grandparents on my dad's side, both my grandmother and my grandfather, on the same piece of property where we live now, they used to live, as I said before, they had a farm there, and they had seen Sasquatch on numerous occasions. More my grandmother than my grandfather, because he was an over-the-road truck driver, so he wasn't home a lot. But she would see Sasquatch all the time. And from what I've learned from her encounter, from what my dad has told me, she never felt threatened by it. She would leave gifts out for it, like food and things like that, and it would take it. And in return, it would leave her leaves and twigs and berries and nuts and rocks and things. So they almost had like a relationship. And my grandmother that lives with us now, when she had her encounter 3 or 4 years ago, she said she didn't feel fear at all. She said she felt like it was just there to observe, like it was just watching. She said, I didn't feel scared a bit. She said, I felt like it was almost friendly. So, yeah, I would have to say that I would much rather deal with the Sasquatch than with Dogman.
It sure sounds to me like she was in a pretty ideal situation, a lot more ideal than most Dogman eyewitnesses find themselves in.
Yes, absolutely. Well, she observed it from her bedroom window, so she wasn't outside with it, but she just said she sat and watched it for probably 20 minutes or so. And she said it was kind of sitting up in the woods, just looking around. My dad was outside next door, and he was working out in the yard, and she said it seemed like it was watching what my dad was doing. And once he quit doing what he was doing, she said the Sasquatch got up off the tree stump that it had sat on, and it walked back up in the woods. And she said, I never felt fear for a second.
Yeah, that's a lot different of an encounter than most Dogman eyewitnesses report having.
Yes.
Now that your family's been through these strange experiences with Dogman, do you have any words of wisdom or advice for other families who are going through the same thing?
Well, I would have to say, don't be afraid to ask for help if you want help. But having said that, know who you're contacting and I guess do more research into these supposed experts and see how much they really know. If you have to, contact other people who have already talked to these folks to get a feel for how they have treated other eyewitnesses. But I would have to say, don't be ashamed, because there is no shame in having a sighting. These things do exist. They are real. And it can only help matters if more people come forward. Because when people have sightings, the rest of the world doesn't know that you've had a sighting. So unless you come forward and say that, hey, I've seen this, And yeah, you're going to have people that are going to laugh at you. Yeah, you're going to have people that are going to make fun of you. They're going to call you nuts, crazy. Were you drinking? Were you smoking anything? You're just going to have that, and you're just going to have to deal with that. But don't be afraid. You have nothing to, in my opinion, you have nothing to lose by talking about your encounter. All you have to gain is support. And you'll find that you have more doors open up to you by talking about what happened, because there are people out there, like Vic, who do care, and they do want to hear your story, and they do believe you. And if you need help, there are other people that are out there to help you.
That's all very well said and very good advice. Well, it's about time for us to get out of here, Rachael and Robert. I can't thank the two of you enough for coming on the show and sharing those experiences with us. I really do appreciate it.
Well, we thank you very much, Vic.
It's definitely appreciated. Thanks again so much for your time. Have yourself a great night.
You too, Vic. Thanks a lot.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.